I built a 1:72 scale model airplane and blew it up in my backyard just to recreate that iconic scene from Die Hard 2. In a world ruled by short-form content where AI slop is spreading like digital locusts, I decided to do things the old-school way using mostly practical effects. It turned into a wild ride full of DIY pain, amateur filmmaking surprises, and a lot of questionable decisions. Christmas is coming, and we all have that one movie we love to rewatch every year. Home Alone, Elf, or Love Actually. But for me, it will always be the first two Die Hard movies.
Die Hard is not a Christmas movie.
Yeah, technically they're action films, but everything about them just feels like Christmas. I mean, in both first movies, McClane is out there on Christmas Eve, kicking terrorists' asses while they're busy making the worst holiday decisions imaginable. And you know, he does all that without big muscles, without kung fu, and no spraying bullets with a giant machine gun like Rambo. And he's definitely not some costumed superhero from a Marvel movie. McClane's badassery is different. He's basically your hungover dad who still somehow manages to beat up all the crooks in the neighborhood. And when you're a kid, that makes him feel like the ultimate hero. Bruce Willis nailed that role. It's honestly hard to imagine anyone else playing John McClane. Most people know about his illness now and how things are. It hits you in this strange, quiet way. For me, it's another reminder of how quickly time moves, and eventually, it catches up with all of us. I know trying to recreate a 35-year-old movie scene with a zero-budget, amateur, full-on backyard engineering approach sounds like a terrible plan. But hey, maybe someone out there will still find it interesting. These days, if you wanted to recreate this scene, any director would just go straight to CGI. Cheaper, faster, total control. But back in the late 80s and early 90s, CGI was still in its early stages, which meant almost every big effect you saw on screen was practical. Die Hard 2 came out in 1990, a whole year before Terminator 2 changed the game, and even that movie was still mostly practical effects. Industrial Light and Magic worked on Die Hard 2, and they put in an insane amount of effort. About 6 months of work went into the different sequences, including the grand finale explosion. They built a 20-foot miniature of a McDonnell Douglas DC-8. The reason? Realism. Tiny models are harder to film and harder to match with live-action footage. I rewatched this scene a ridiculous number of times, trying to catch every tiny detail. The most important thing I needed was, of course, the plane itself. Obviously, I couldn't afford to build a giant model like that, so I went online looking for plane models. There weren't a lot of options. The main problem was scale and price. After some more digging, I realized that a Boeing 707 looks pretty similar to a DC-8, and I actually found a 1:72 model kit for about $55. Which was perfect not only because of the size, but because it was a kit, not a solid pre-built model, which at least in theory should make it blow apart a lot more dramatically. While the plane was still on its way, I started filming the shots with John in frame. Now I'm obviously nowhere near Bruce Willis's level of charisma. I don't have his piercing green eyes or that perfect 3-day stubble. I'm more of, you know, a different kind of actor. But at least I shaved off my silly goatee, took out the earrings I've been wearing for years, and tried to put together something close to McClane's outfit. Since it was fall, I needed some fake snow. But where the hell do you even get that much of it? Sure, you can buy the artificial stuff, but if you need a lot, yeah, that budget goes right out the window. So I had to go with a relatively cheap DIY solution. I took a quick trip to IKEA and grabbed a few cheap pillows. I figured the stuffing inside could work perfectly as the base for the snow. And if you're thinking, wouldn't it be cheaper to just buy stuffing separately? Nope. I actually checked with a local fabric and material store, and the price per weight was even higher. So forget YouTube, I'm starting a polyester stuffing empire.
Pillows crack open, clouds in my hands. Turn fluff to gold, yeah, I got big plans. Not silk, not satin, I'm the fiber boss. Whispering profits, watch the numbers cross.
And the more I looked at that stuffing, the more it felt like I was at some preschool Christmas party. It would probably work better as fake clouds in the sky than actual snow, so I had to figure out a way to make it look a bit more believable. And if you ever feel like you're wasting your life, it's me out there, blending chunks of styrofoam. I thought about using it from the very beginning, but the problem is for an area this big, you need a lot of it. Plus it's insanely messy. After a bit of practice with the food processor, I finally got the hang of it. A couple of hours later, I had a full bag of shredded foam. It actually looked pretty good, kind of like frozen snow or small hail. So I laid out 2 bed sheets on the lawn to keep the grass from showing through too much. One sheet was for the area under me, and the other for the shadow you can see in the original scene. Then I started spreading out the stuffing, flattening it and spraying it with a deep penetrating wall primer to reduce the extra volume and make it a bit stickier. On top of that, I sprinkled my shredded foam, trying to mix it through the stuffing fibers and adding more primer so it would hold together. I can't say I was happy with the result, and it still looked pretty toy-like, but not as bad as before. Now all I had to do was hope it wouldn't rain, wait for the night to fall, and turn myself into John McClane, or at least my backyard version of him. Once it got completely dark, I set up a black backdrop, added a key light from the side, one kicker with a snoot, and 2 RGB panels to simulate the light from fire and explosion. At the same time, I mixed some food coloring, splashed it on my tank top, and asked my wife to smear some on my face and neck. I wrapped a bandage around my hand and of course armed myself with a Zippo lighter. By the way, my snow looked way worse under this lighting. The shadows made every flaw stand out even more. Obviously, I'm not much of an actor, and shooting all of this solo was really challenging, but I'm super grateful to my wife. She helped me as much as she could, even though she's absolutely terrified of touching my gear. For the explosion effect, I grouped the LED panels together and asked my wife to control them from my phone. And of course, I didn't actually set anything on fire. This stuff is highly flammable, and otherwise, you'd probably hear about me not on YouTube, but in some local obituary. All that fire next to me had to be added later in post. Some shots look surprisingly close to the original, but others not so much. Ideally, I should have been checking every shot, moving the camera, adjusting the lights, and changing my position. It would have been way better to rehearse everything in advance instead of doing it all on the fly. That night, the temperature suddenly dropped below 0 and everything around me started to freeze. You can actually see me shaking from the cold while lying on the ground. So yeah, it was definitely time to wrap it up before I ended up with pneumonia. It turned out to be the coldest night of October, and if real snow had started falling, that would have been peak irony. By the time I was doing all that, my airplane model had finally arrived. A big box full of plastic parts, decals, and of course the instruction manual. I've never built a model like this before, so this was my first time. After quickly going through the manual, I sorted all the parts by color groups and masked off the areas that needed to stay untouched using paper painter's tape. I painted everything pretty quickly and thought I nailed it. Not a damn thing. After a while, I noticed the main paint looked weird, uneven, full of spots and tiny bubbles. And when I peeled off the tape from the fuselage, I realized the white plastic underneath had actually started to melt. I instantly knew what happened. I checked the label. There was freaking acetone. So I rushed to the hardware store for a new can, partially removed the old paint, and repainted everything again. Honestly, I don't even know what I'm worse at, acting or painting. If you're into building model kits, and this part gives you a major case of butt hurt, I'm sorry in advance. First, I cleaned up the paint mess, and yeah, this time acetone was actually my friend. I sanded down the melted plastic, grabbed some super glue, and started the assembly. Bigger parts were actually easy to glue, but the small ones, complete disaster. I'm just not built for this kind of delicate work, and my hands were shaking like a full-time alcoholic. Slowly, things started to take shape. But the plane was getting covered in glue, the paint was peeling off, and there were gaps along some of the joints. I tried to fill them with some acrylic sealant, but honestly, it didn't help much. It still looked pretty rough. So, one more paint job. Surprisingly, the decals went pretty well, even though I was half expecting a total mess. The trick is, keep them wet, don't rush, and you'll probably be fine. Oh, and don't touch the decals once they're dry. Finally, the plane was done. I probably spent 3 full days on it, and yeah, I wanted to blow the damn thing up right away. But first, it had to fly. I was planning to film this outside, but it was raining every single day. The whole week, non-stop. So instead of wasting time, I moved everything right into my living room and set it all up on the dining table. I laid down a white plastic backdrop and built this thing out of light stands and whatever else I could find. Inside the plane, I placed a small metal washer with a fishing line attached, so I could actually pull it during the takeoff. The plane itself was tied up with fishing line in several spots, and at first I tried to hang it using a step-up filter ring on the horizontal bar, but because of all the joints in that thing, the movement wasn't smooth. My ultra-professional fixes with duct tape didn't help much either. I even tried strapping a camera slider to it, and it actually kinda worked. But the travel distance was way too short. So I ended up replacing it with a metal cable and a carabiner instead. For lighting, I set up something loosely inspired by the original scene. Once the frame was ready, I started testing the takeoff. It was surprisingly hard to match the original shot. During the tests, a few pieces fell off, including those stupid landing gears. So I replaced them with tiny wheels from one of my son's toy cars. I needed something to use as snow. And at this tiny scale, pretty much any white powder works. There's that cool trick with shaving cream and baking powder. You can even make real snowballs with it. But this time I just used good old flour. There's a classic rule for filming miniatures. Take the model's scale, 1/72 in my case, then take the square root of the denominator. The square root of 72 is approximately 8.49. That means the camera should shoot about 8.5 times slower than real life, roughly 200 frames per second. My old Panasonic can do 180 frames per second at 30p, and if you drop that into a 24p timeline, you get 20% more slow motion. I started launching the plane. The nose kept tilting up, way too high, looking totally unnatural. So I just kept launching it again, and again, and again. Ideally, I should have added some weight inside to keep it stable instead of letting it wobble around. I tried adjusting the balance, changing the angles. Nothing really helped. I retied the lines, and now the nose was tilting down. It was already way past midnight, and the next morning was going to be a full-scale cleanup of all that mess. Eventually, though, I got something close enough. As you noticed, I filmed everything against a black backdrop. I thought it was a smart move. No chroma key reflections and no green spill. Turns out it was a fatal mistake because I still needed to bring this shot to life in post, which meant only one thing: rotoscoping and way too much of it. After Effects couldn't handle it very well, and because the lighting was already set up like it was the final shot. So I ended up adjusting the rotobrush frame by frame, drawing masks and tweaking shapes. Honestly, pure torture. I'm not a VFX artist, but I tried my absolute best. I built the background and foreground plates, added overlays with snow, dust, and fog, tossed in a bunch of extra elements, and of course the fire. And then there was that other shot. I filmed that one the same night, rushed it completely, and it looked terrible straight to the trash. But I really didn't want to reshoot it. I tried using Adobe Firefly to generate a matte painting, and it gave me this. Seriously? So I grabbed a bunch of stock photos and cobbled together something by hand, sprinkled on more FX layers, and well, it went from pure crap to slightly more decorative crap, like crap with lipstick on it. Maybe in 2010 this would have been fine, but today, I don't think so.
All the fire effects here were done with proper safety precautions. This isn't a tutorial, just my process. And whenever fire is involved, staying safe and using common sense is the main rule.
Every fire overlay you see in this video, I actually filmed myself. Sure, I could have just grabbed some stock footage that probably looked better, but I figured doing it myself would feel more authentic. I do have some basic knowledge of practical fire effects and small-scale pyrotechnics. And honestly, to create these cool fire clouds, you don't need anything crazy. For backyard FX, I like using powders like lycopodium or amber powder, but even cornstarch or cinnamon can give you a similar fiery effect. The cool thing is, these powders aren't very flammable on their own, but once you turn them into a cloud of tiny particles, they mix with oxygen in the air, and suddenly you've got the perfect recipe for ignition. Who knew something from a chemistry textbook could look this Hollywood? The temperature isn't too hot and they burn almost completely. Of course, you still need to be careful, but honestly, it's not more dangerous than sitting by a campfire. The main thing I'd recommend: watch the wind. So dust explosions give you the best ratio of looks epic to actually pretty safe. Liquids like gasoline or isopropyl can make much bigger and longer fireballs, but using those is a whole different level of danger. I wanted to use powder to create the very beginning of the explosion. I set everything up in my backyard, mounted the plane on a steel rod, removed the inside of the engine, and started testing. I experimented with how to deliver the powder, how much of it to use tried compressed air and an electric air blower, played with positioning the torch so it wouldn't show up in the frame. And everything seemed fine, until I actually looked at the test footage. First problem: the flame shooting out of the engine kept traveling forward, completely breaking the illusion of a plane in flight. Second problem: the highlights were totally blown out, which is pretty unforgivable. So I had to re-expose specifically for the fire and add a light source to balance the scene. To counteract the powder drifting forward, I mounted the air blower so it pushed the cloud back toward the engine. The biggest issue was the scale. Too little powder, and you just get these tiny, slow little flames. Too much, and the entire frame is basically on fire. It looked pretty terrible, like a kindergarten science project and not exactly impressive. In the end, despite all my effort, I had to piece it together from whatever I had. And even though those powder fireballs look great, they don't actually do any damage. There's no way they could tear the model apart. To actually explode the plane, I used the good old classic firecrackers. When I was a kid, every backyard had them, which honestly wasn't great because children with explosives not the best combo. Sure, I could have just stuck them inside the plane, lit it, and ran away really fast. But I wanted something with a bit more of a movie-style approach. So I used an electric match. Inside it is a thin layer of pyrotechnic composition, kind of like old-school photochemicals. You connect it to a power source. The current runs through the wire, the match heats up instantly, flashes and ignites whatever you need. Simple and reliable. I cut out the back panel to get inside the fuselage. I also weakened the structure a bit, making small cuts in different spots. Then I mounted the plane on a metal rod using 2 nuts and a washer, just to make sure it wouldn't fly off before I actually blew it up. On the day of the shoot, the sun was out, but it was still freezing. A sharp, bone-cutting wind was blowing non-stop. Postponing wasn't an option. The weather was getting worse every single day. My backdrop kept inflating like a giant sail and tried to collapse every 5 minutes. Then I started loading the firecrackers inside the plane. I stuffed the fuselage with crushed eggshells and random debris to fake small shrapnel and sprinkled in some of my magic powder, connected the electric matches and wired everything up. To get some extra coverage, I set up 2 iPhones as additional cameras. The quality isn't amazing, but their slow-mo is still pretty solid. I covered my main camera with some styrofoam and screwed on a filter for protection. Firecrackers aren't super powerful, but you never really know how far things might fly. And just in case Armageddon decided to kick off, I had this cute little garden hose standing by. I waited for the sun to drop behind the house, warned the neighbors, and my family gathered by the window like they were about to watch a blockbuster. I connected the wires. And nothing, just silence. Except for the backdrop collapsing. But this time, fighting against all my reinforcements, it actually tore the metal bracket right off the stand. Fantastic. I was so done with this. During the tests, a single 9-volt battery could ignite 2 electric matches. So I figured a double battery setup would easily handle 4. But if I'd actually paid attention in school, I'd know that resistance doesn't work that way, and those matches need more amps, not more volts. Meanwhile, I'm wrestling with this damn backdrop. The light is fading, the wind is picking up, and I'm getting angrier by the minute. In the end, I cut everything down to 1 charge, took a breath, connected the wires, and... You can see the plane blowing apart. The powder barely ignites, the wind pushes everything forward, and the wings stay perfectly in place. At least my nut and washer mount was solid. Moments like this remind me why sticking to the plan matters. Sometimes you really should take a pause, think things through, and not let frustration do the driving. So yeah, that was a complete fiasco, guys. Luckily, the plane broke into a few large chunks. I gathered everything, and the next day, like some kind of Victor Frankenstein, I brought my little creature back to life, glued it together using every adhesive I own, and left it to dry. This time I did my homework, waited for complete darkness so I wouldn't have to deal with the backdrop at all. Placed the plane on the downwind side, nose forward, so everything would blow back and actually look like it's in flight. And for the power source, I used this big drill battery. Packed everything inside again, and to ignite my magic powder this time, I set up this improvised little torch. Well, here we go. All or nothing. Well, not bad at all for a $50 miniature and just a few firecrackers. I was honestly surprised how well it all came together. Even the tail blew off almost exactly like in the original scene. And you know, I was both happy and kind of disappointed at the same time. Sure, having a few more models would have been great, but honestly, I think this whole thing is already way too much. It's probably time to wrap it up. But if you really want to understand the level of my madness, I actually wanted to film one last shot. A massive fireball with airplane debris flying through it. Yeah, at this point I had clearly lost my mind. Once again, I went outside, set up all the lights, hung the main chunks of the model on a light stand with a boom arm. Of course, I knew there was no way I'd get anywhere close to the original shot, but I hoped that if I gathered some fireballs, bits of debris, and dust glowing in orange light, I could somehow turn it into something usable. But the wind was insane, like it was literally telling me, "Please stop, enough." The torch kept blowing out. The fire cloud was getting ripped apart instantly. It was hopeless. I even tried moving the whole setup behind the house, but the wind there acted completely insane. It was freezing, my hands were numb, and I was honestly exhausted just fighting everything this entire video. Then, the wind suddenly calmed down. I knew this was my last chance. I rushed to prep the charge. And of course, I lost my air blower in the dark. No time left. So I went for the last, absolutely desperate option. It worked, but it looked pretty ridiculous. And you know what? I decided not to push it any further and just leave it as it is. Let it be a reminder of how limited I actually am. And of course, I was still missing one pretty important detail. While editing, I kept hoping real snow might finally fall, but it only showed up for a couple of days. So yeah, I had to fake that part in post as well. At that point, all that was left was to put everything together, do the sound design, and try to find music that at least vaguely fits. So, if anyone is still alive at this point in the video, thank you.
Yippee-ki-yay, and hit that like button.